A very good afternoon and welcome to the World News Review on Independent Television Abuja. I'm Kiro Obuli. Starting out, flooding and landslide in Japan left at least 85 dead and several houses destroyed just as the first set of the trapped Thai boys were brought out of the cave. Osaona Bizwe has this and more on the foreign scene.
Hundreds of homes have been destroyed or damaged. In all, 8 prefectures have been affected, including Kyoto and Hiroshima. The Japan Meteorological Agency upgraded its alert system to the highest level in large areas of western Japan, while lifting warning in other regions. Of rain fell between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. in the city of Uwajima, approximately 1.5 times the average monthly rainfall for July. In Tsukumo City in Kochi Prefecture, 263 millimeters of rain fell in 2 hours. Heavy rain was forecast to continue through Sunday in the west and the east. At least 4 million people have been advised to evacuate surrounding areas. Government officials are warning people in affected areas they are at risk for landslides, flooding, wind gusts and other extreme weather conditions. 4 of the 12 boys who have been trapped in the flooded cave in northern Thailand for more than 2 weeks have been rescued as the operation was put on hold overnight to allow oxygen tanks to be refilled. Chiang Rai Governor Narongsak Osothanakon said as teams replenished supplies used to remove the first 4 boys, the mission to free the remaining members of the group has been suspended for at least 10 hours. But authorities face a new race against time as heavy rain, which had been predicted later this week, pummeled the cave complex in northern Thailand shortly after the first boys were freed. The boys, who are due to be taken to Chiang Rai Hospital for further medical examination, are said to be in good health, with their condition described by officials as not that bad. Confirmation of the initial rescue was posted on the Thai Navy SEAL official Facebook page late Sunday evening, several hours ahead of the initial schedule provided by authorities. The first of the 4 boys emerged from the cave entrance about 9 hours after a team of 18 international cave diving experts entered the underground chamber to begin the hazardous process of accompanying the boys through the flooded narrow tunnels to safety. Previously, the entire round trip through the cave network was thought to take roughly 11 hours to complete, but efforts to drain the tunnels of flood water appear to have shortened the journey time by at least 3.5 hours.
Ethiopia and Eritrea have declared an end to the long-ranging war, just as the rescue operation of the Thai boys continued. Again, Osaona Bizwe has more news on the foreign scene.
A peace deal ending the 1998 to 1999 border conflict has never been fully implemented, and there has been tension between the neighbors ever since. The countries have also agreed to re-establish trade and diplomatic ties. The declaration came at a landmark meeting between the 2 country leaders in Eritrea's capital, Asmara. The summit between Eritrea's President Asias Afwerki and Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed marked the first time the neighbors' heads of state had met for nearly 2 decades. A peace deal signed in 2000 established a border commission that went on to rule that the town of Badme, the flashpoint for the conflict, was part of Eritrea. Ethiopia's refusal to accept this meant that normal relations were never resumed, and the 2 countries were in a state of no war, no peace. A source within the operation has told local news that cave divers in northern Thailand have rescued 4 more boys from a vast flooded cave system. This suggests that in total 8 boys have been safely brought out, while 5 people remain inside the caves. The 12 boys and their football coach were trapped in the cave on the 23rd of June after heavy rains caused flooding. 4 boys were brought out safely on Sunday, but the mission was passed overnight for air tanks to be replaced. There has been no official confirmation from the Thai Navy SEALs leading the rescue operation that anyone was brought out of the cave system on Monday, the 2nd day of a complex operation. Dominic Raab has been appointed Brexit Secretary by Theresa May after David Davis resigned from the government. Mr. Rahab, who is currently Housing Minister, was a prominent Leave campaigner during the 2016 referendum. Mr. Davis quit late on Sunday night, saying Theresa May had given away too much too easily. The 44-year-old Mr. Rahab, a lawyer before becoming an MP in 2010, will now take over day-to-day negotiations with the EU's Michel Barnier. The UK is due to leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019, but the two sides have yet to agree how trade will work between the UK and the EU afterwards. There has been differences between the Conservative Party over how far the UK should prioritize the economy by compromising on issues such as leaving the remit of the European Court of Justice, ending free movement of people.
U.S. President Donald Trump has nominated Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court, setting the stage for a bruising confirmation battle. Blessing Umaru has this and more news on the foreign scene.
In a prime-time announcement at the White House, Mr. Trump praised his pick as a brilliant jurist. The nominee, a District of Columbia Appeal Court judge, is a former advisor to ex-President George W. Bush. The decision has far-reaching implications for Americans on everything from abortion to guns to immigration. This is Mr. Trump's second Supreme Court appointment, potentially allowing him to shape the U.S. for a generation. The appointee would replace Justice Anthony Kennedy, 81, who announced last month that he will retire soon. A commercial ship flying the Italian flag and carrying dozens of rescued migrants was refused permission to dock at Italian ports. The Vos Talassa, a supply ship which serves oil rigs in the Mediterranean, rescued 66 people adrift off the Libyan coast. After being turned away from the Italian ports, it handed the migrants over to the Italian Coast Guard. Italy's government has blocked charity rescue ships from its ports for weeks. Italian officials, however, said that the Vos Talassa did not need to intervene, as the Libyan Coast Guard was on its way.
And first pictures emerge of the rescued Thai boys in a hospital as death tolls continue to rise after the flooding and landslide that plagued the Asian country of Japan. Blessing Umaru has more news on the foreign scene.
The pictures were published as new details emerged of the enormously complex effort to bring them out alive. Sources in the rescue operation, including divers who took part, told newsmen that the boys were heavily sedated ahead of the rescue to prevent them panicking in the dark, narrow underwater passageways. They were then strapped to one of two rescue divers tasked with shepherding each boy through the underwater parts of the system and bundled into stretchers to be carried through the dry parts. There were, however, conflicting reports in the hours after the rescue about the extent to which the boys had been medicated before they were brought out. The Thai Prime Minister on Tuesday denied reports that they had been sedated, saying the boys were given only light anti-anxiety medication commonly provided to soldiers. But several sources have since confirmed that the boys were only partially conscious as they were brought out. The group was trapped in the cave by rising water and rescued in a dramatic operation that captivated the world. The complex three-day rescue saw 4 boys emerge on Sunday, 4 on Monday, and the final 4 boys plus their coach on Tuesday. They survived the 9 days before they were found by drinking water dripping from the cave walls. Japan is still reeling from one of its worst flooding disasters in decades, which has killed at least 179 people and left 70 missing. Torrential rains triggered landslides and floods in central and western areas. More than 8 million people have been ordered to evacuate their homes. The rain has relented, but the country is still struggling to deal with the extensive damage left in its wake. This is the highest death toll caused by rainfall in Japan since 1982. U.S. President Donald Trump has clashed with German Chancellor Angela Merkel over Russian influence and defense spending. Ahead of a NATO summit, Mr. Trump said Germany was totally controlled by Russia because of the high level of natural gas it imported, and this was a bad thing for NATO. Mrs. Merkel hit back by insisting Germany was independent and defending its contribution to the alliance. The last summit both leaders attended ended in acrimony in a row over trade. They are due to meet again in Brussels on Wednesday.
We'll take a quick break now. When we return, the World News Review continues. Please stay with us.
In the Independent television is live 24 hours on Go TV, channel 107, Star Times, channel 130. And now you can watch from any part of the world on Roku TV, Smart TV, Amazon Fire TV, and Android TV for your favorite programs, news, current affairs, and lots more. You don't want to miss our objective and balanced reportage, entertainment, and sports. Now follow us via our social media channels on Twitter at ITV Radio NG. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ITV Radio NG. Like our Facebook page, facebook.com/ITV Radio NG. Visit our website for more news stories and lots more, itvradioNigeria.com. Watch ITV via live streaming on the internet, itvradioNigeria.com/live, and click on the TV stream option. Also remember to visit your mobile app store and download the ITV app so you can watch on the go. Independent television, certainly the best.
You're on to the world news on Independent Television Abuja. Moving on to other reports, South Sudan's parliament has voted to extend President Salva Kiir's term in office until 2020 as elections this year have been postponed because of conflict. Mr. Kiir has been in power since South Sudan's independence in 2011 and elections in 2015 were also postponed. The move could undermine ongoing peace talks aimed at ending almost 5 years of civil war in the country. Last month, Mr. Kiir signed a deal with his rival Riek Machar in which both agreed to a permanent ceasefire. The agreement was supposed to be followed by further negotiations and the setting up of a power-sharing government with Mr. Machar reappointed as a vice president and other opposition politicians also taking up positions in an expanded cabinet. Mr. Kiir's critics accuse him of being an authoritarian ruler clinging to power. He denies the allegation. The death toll from the 4 months of political unrest in Nicaragua has risen to 264, a human rights body has said in advance of new protests in the country. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights on Wednesday said more than 1,800 people have been injured since the start of the repression against social protests. A raid by pro-government forces in the opposition bastion of Masaya left at least 14 people dead on Sunday, shortly after embattled President Daniel Ortega rejected calls for early elections. The opposition is planning to increase pressure on Ortega in the coming days, with a protest due to take place in Managua on Thursday, followed by a general strike on Friday. Rights groups have accused security forces and groups loyal to the government of using lethal force to crack down on the protests. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that NATO countries have agreed to increase their military spending. Speaking after a two-day summit in Brussels, he says allies have committed to spending more than 2% of their annual output on defense budgets. Mr. Trump has been highly critical of NATO, complaining the U.S. pays more than others, although he's told newsmen he had no plans to leave currently. In 2014, all NATO members agreed to increase their defense spending to 2% of their GDP by 2024. Mr. Trump wants this to happen sooner and has previously urged NATO allies to commit at least 4% of GDP. After the summit, President Emmanuel Macron denied any increases had been made to the existing goal, according to the Associated Press. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he is fine about the protests expected to be held during his UK visit, saying Britons like him a lot. Speaking earlier at the NATO summit, Mr. Trump, who arrived in the UK, referred to Britain as a pretty hot spot right now. He will meet Theresa May later, who wants a post-Brexit trade deal days after he said the UK was in turmoil. Extra security has been put in place to police a number of planned protests. Mr. Trump, who will also spend time with the Queen during his two-day working visit, said he thinks they like him a lot in the UK and they agreed with him on immigration. Mr. Trump has recently been under fire for his own immigration policy, which resulted in the separation of immigrant families. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Thursday pressed European nations to get off on Iran by cutting off all funding the country may use to foment instability in the Middle East and beyond. Pompeo was meeting European officials in Brussels following a meeting of NATO leaders to make the case for clamping down on Iranian terrorism and proxy wars. He asked them to join a U.S.-led economic pressure campaign against Iran that began in earnest after President Donald Trump withdrew from the landmark Iran nuclear deal in May. His comments came as other U.S. officials have found out around the globe to warn foreign governments to stop buying oil from Iran or face sanctions, and after he accused Iran of using its embassies to plot terrorist attacks in Europe. Iran denies involvement and contends the allegation against its diplomats are intended to damage its relations with the European Union. An international rights group is calling for an investigation into alleged disappearances, torture, and likely deaths in prison and network of secret detention facilities run by the United Arab Emirates and allied militias in southern Yemen. Amnesty International said in a report on Thursday that it had documented systemic enforced disappearance and torture and other ill treatments amounting to war crimes in the facility. The report says some detainees are feared to have died in custody. Amnesty called on the United Arab Emirates government to immediately stop the torture and to release detainees. In the meantime, it said the U.S. should suspend intelligence gathering cooperation with the UAE and stop supplying it with weapons. Syrian rebels have agreed to surrender the southern city of Daraa, the first to revolt against President Bashar al-Assad in Arab Spring-inspired protest earlier this decade. Protests in Daraa in 2011 against the government's mistreatment of teenage detainees ignited a national revolt against decades of authoritarian rule. Syria eventually descended into a full-blown civil war that claimed the lives of some 400,000 people and displaced more than 5 million as refugees. Rebels refusing to accept the deal will be exiled with their families to other rebel-held parts of the country. The agreement followed a template imposed by the government and its Russian and Iranian backers that have forced hundreds of thousands of Syrians, including media activists, army defectors, to give up their homes to lift the sieges against the cities. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte came under renewed pressure Thursday to seek Chinese compliance to an arbitration ruling that invalidated Chinese claim to much of the South China Sea 2 years ago, but has been ignored by Beijing and remained unenforced. Former Philippine Foreign Secretary Albert del Rosario, who spearheaded the arbitration suit, called China a grand larcenist for pressing its territorial claims despite the July 12, 2016 decision, and labeled the Philippines a willing victim for allowing such defiance. The ruling invalidated China's historic claims to virtually the entire waterway, but Beijing refused to acknowledge it or join the arbitration proceedings held by a tribunal in The Hague under the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The United States and other Western governments have backed the arbitration approach as a peaceful, international law-based avenue to resolve the long-raging disputes. A German court on Thursday removed a hurdle to the extradition of a prominent Catalan politician on charges of embezzlement, setting the stage for a possible trial in Spain, but on lesser charges than prosecutors there had hoped for. In its decision in the case of Charles Puigdemont, the Schleswig-Holstein State Court said the former Catalan leader could be extradited on embezzlement charges, but not rebellion. The charge of rebellion is not recognized in Germany, and the court said related German statutes, such as that against treason, did not apply because his actions did not rise to this kind of violence. The charges are in connection with the Catalan regional government's unauthorized referendum last year on independence from Spain and a subsequent unilateral declaration of independence by separatist-controlled regional parliaments. Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini has accused some migrants of hijacking the ship that rescued them off the Libyan coast. It is alleged that in order to avoid being returned to Libya, at least 2 passengers forced the ship to turn away from the inbound Libyan Coast Guard. Details of the incident remained unclear, but Italian media report that police boarded the Coast Guard vessel, the Chioti, to quiz its passengers. They focused on 2 people in particular, 1 Ghanaian and 1 Sudanese, but did not uncover concrete evidence of a violent crime. Officers then traveled to international waters to speak to the crew of the Vos Thalassa, the original rescue vessel which was supposedly hijacked. The Chioti remained in the water off the city of Trapani, Sicily, while the investigation continued. Some sports news. Chelsea is set to announce the departure of manager Antonio Conte after 2 years in charge. The club has refused to comment on the status of the 48-year-old who won the Premier League title in his first season in charge and the FA Cup in May. Conte took pre-season training this week, but his future has been a source of contention, and ex-Napoli manager Maurizio Sarri expected to take over. The Blues have reportedly agreed on a compensation package for Sarri in 59. Should Sarri be appointed, he will be Chelsea's 9th full-time manager since Roman Abramovich bought the club in 2003. During 3 years with Napoli, Sarri has not won a major honor, but has guided the club to finishes of 2nd, 3rd, and 2nd again behind Juventus in 2017 and 2018. The former Empoli manager was named Syria Coach of the Year in 2016 and 2017. NATO's leader turned attention to conflicts in Afghanistan on the 2nd day of Brussels meetings, so far dominated by demands from President Donald Trump. For this and more, let's join Oluseyi Arenwosi.
The cave complex in northern Thailand, where 12 boys and their football coach were trapped for more than 2 weeks, is set to turn into a museum. Rescue officials said the museum would showcase how the operation unfolded, predicting it would be a major attraction for Thailand. At least 2 companies are also looking to make a film telling the story of the rescue. The rescue group are all now recovering in hospital. The Thai Navy SEALs have also published dramatic footage of the operation itself, showing how expert divers navigated the Wide Boa football team through the perilous journey to the surface. On Thursday, the Navy SEALs were given flower garlands and an enthusiastic welcome as they arrived at a military airport south of the capital, Bangkok. The Tham Luang Cave is one of the largest cave systems in Thailand. It lies under the mountain around the small town of Mai Sai in northern Chiang Rai province on the border with Myanmar. Taliban militants reportedly killed up to 30 soldiers in an attack on Afghan army post on Thursday. Mr. Trump has urged NATO allies to commit at least 4% of their annual output GDP to military spending. NATO states are currently working towards a target of 2%. According to reports, President Trump used Thursday morning's meeting to demand that the 2% goal be met by 2019. Local news say he broke from a carefully scripted session about other NATO matter to emphatically restate his position. In a press conference, Mr. Trump was complimentary about the meeting. He also said he believed in NATO and it was a fine-tuned machine. Chinese authorities are investigating why a plane was forced to drop more than 6,500 meters, 21,000 feet, due to loss of cabin pressure. The Air China flight from Hong Kong to Dalian lost altitude rapidly and oxygen mask dropped in the cabin. The plane then returned to cruising altitude and continued as scheduled. There is speculation in local media that crew had been smoking in the cockpit and then mishandled the ventilation system. Chinese aviation authorities are examining both the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder to determine what caused the incident. Several passengers on board the Tuesday flight posted pictures of the dropped oxygen mask on social media. According to some people on board, cited on Chinese media, passengers were told to fasten their seat belts and told that the plane had to descend. If a plane loses cabin pressure, the pilot has to bring the aircraft to a lower altitude to keep crew and passengers safe.
And for Foreign News Friday, our correspondent is standing by.
Cameroon's President Paul Biya has announced that he will be a candidate in the 7 October presidential election that will, if he wins, extend his 35 years rule. Mr. Biya tweeted in French and in English, "I am willing to respond positively to your overwhelming cause. I will stand as your candidate in the upcoming presidential election." The 85-year-old leader has been in power since 1982, making him one of Africa's largest serving leaders. Under his rule, Cameroon has survived an economic crisis and moved from being a one-party system to multi-party politics. And in South Sudan, the United Security Council will vote Friday on a draft resolution to impose an arms embargo on South Sudan and renew sanctions against it for another year. The US says the resolution is essential to end the continued violence in a 5-year civil war. But China and Russia say the extension of punitive measures against South Sudan at this time could jeopardize moves towards peace between the warring sides. However, diplomats say the US resolution is likely to be adopted. At the end of June, South Sudanese President Salva Kiir and the opposition leader Riek Machar signed a ceasefire, which both sides accused the other of violation. And in UK, President Donald Trump has said the US-UK relationship was indispensable, just hours after his comment attacking Theresa May's Brexit plan emerged. Speaking after talk with the Prime Minister, Mr. Trump said, "Whatever the UK does after it leaves the EU is okay with me, and Brexit was an incredible opportunity." Mrs. May said they have discussed plans for an ambitious trade agreement. Meanwhile, thousands of people are protesting in central London against Mr. Trump's visit to Britain. A large balloon portraying the president as a baby was also floated in the Parliament Square. Other protests are due to take place across the UK. Mr. Trump arrived at Turkey by helicopter after visiting the Royal Military Academy at Sandoz on Friday morning. And in Syria, the US-led coalition says it may have carried out an airstrike in an area of eastern Syria, where scores of civilians were reportedly killed on Thursday. 54 people, including at least 28 civilians, as well as Islamic State group militants, died in the strike on a village near the Iraqi border, a monitoring group says. The raid hit a gathering at an ice factory near the village of Al-Sousa. Syria has blamed the US for the incident in Deir al-Zur province. Coalition spokesman US Army Colonel Syrian said the coalition or their partner of forces may have conducted strike in the vicinity of Al-Sousa. The area around Al-Sousa on the eastern bank of the Euphrates River is still under the control of IS, which still retains pockets of territory near the border with Iraq.
And that has been the World News Review on Independent Television Abuja. Many thanks for staying with us. I'm Kira Obuli.